Very good morning. Welcome to yet another edition of ACFIM Talks with you in the studio. My name is Felix Kafuma, who is the host, and today we're discussing the national budget 2022-2023. And the bigger question is it responsive to the skyrocketing prices? With me in the studio, I have a gentleman that I'll be introducing. I'm expecting another panelist that I'll be introducing in a short while. But before we start, allow me to, as it is a usual practice, to invite everybody to be part of this discussion. You can subscribe to all our social media platforms. We are live on Facebook, ACFIM. We are live on YouTube, ACFIM Uganda, and also on our Twitter handle at ACFIM UG. You can be able to catch us and follow these discussions, and also be able to contribute to the discussions. You'll also be able to get the notifications on our YouTube. If you subscribe to our YouTube account, ACFIM Uganda. And yes, again, as we move into the reading of the budget, which is almost a quarter, it's about around a corner away from I think probably next week we shall be having a budget reading. We'll look at the national budget, putting it into the spotlight. And before I introduce the panelists, allow me to lay a bit of a context to why is it important that we have this discussion, especially today and at this point in time. You are all aware that Parliament has approved a 48.1 trillion budget for the financial year 2022-2023. And out of the 48.1 trillion budget, we expect government to generate 25.7 trillion from the revenue collections. And that means that we shall be having a shortfall that, as usual, will be raised from domestic and external borrowing. Already, Uganda's public debt currently stands at 73.5 trillion Uganda shillings. So when we are not just about stop being in the books of datas, but when you look at this budget as well closely, which has been approved, you'll be able to realize that the human capital development, which takes care of education, health, and gender, those sectors will take the largest share, standing at 8.7 trillion, which is 18% of the national budget. And then it will be followed by the security and governance program, which is going to take 7 trillion, which is 14% of the national budget, followed by the transport, which will take 4.1 trillion, and then we'll have energy taking 1.6 trillion, and the private sector, which will take 1.5 trillion. And that is pretty much the top five beneficiaries from this budget. So it's also important for you to know that the 2022-2023 budget is focusing on three objectives. The first objective being ensuring peace and stability, and that explains why we have security and governance being the second largest funded budget priority. The third objective is looking at mitigating the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, and I think that also speaks to why there's been significant investment or allocation to the private sector, being among the top five that have benefited from the budget allocations. And then the third objective is looking at enhancing socio-economic transformation. So this budget comes at a time when Ugandans are grappling with the skyrocketing prices. Inflation is peaking at 6.3. I think it has risen from 4. I think it was 4.7 somewhere around April, if I'm correct with my figures. and the situation has been blamed on external factors, mainly the war in between Ukraine and Russia, but also the COVID-19 pandemic induced shortages that have disrupted this global supply chain. This and much more coming up as we discuss today's national budget in focus, whether it is responsive to the skyrocketing prices. And with me, I have already in the studios Moses Molondo. Moses Molondo is the president for the Uganda Parliamentary Press Association, UPP, and is ACFIM Talks. I think Moses, you have background in your. My producer, I think, check on Moses to see how we can mitigate the background noise.
No, Felix, are you able to hear me now?
I hear you now. You are clear now. Great, thank you.
Okay.
I'm expecting Honorable Stephen Mukitare, who is the former MP for Bulisa County. We hope he can join in to weigh in this debate. But before he comes in, let me start with Moses. Moses, you've seen the budget. I'm so sure you've had a couple of discussions around this budget that is proposed. The 48.1 trillion budget. What's your take? How do you sum it up? How do you wrap it up in your own perspective?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, it's a 48.1 trillion. I agree with a number of experts that are saying that our budget is not realistic. Because out of the 48.8 trillion, the projected revenue collection by government is only 25.7 trillion. And that basically means that nearly half of the budget is going to be funded on external and internal borrowing. But also, increasingly, the portion of the national budget that goes to interest and debt payment has been exponentially rising. In the budget for the next financial year, which we are talking about, which financial year starts next month, the budget for interest and debt repayment is 17 trillion. Now, 17 trillion plus our wage bill, which is 6 trillion, that comes to 23 trillion, which is actually our current revenue collection capacity. So it basically means that all the revenue collection that government will get will mainly be spent on debt repayment and paying salaries and allowances. And that means that for all the government activities and programs, for government to be able to fund them, it will have to resort to borrowing externally and internally. But the other major concern about the budget also is that out of the 48.1 trillion, a whooping 34 trillion is for recurrent expenditures. That is money for still paying wages, for administrative costs, for travels inland, travels abroad. Of course, that is money that is majorly consumptive. A whooping 34 trillion. Some time back, I saw a video clip in which the president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, was laughing at us, the neighbors. He was scoffing at us and he said Kenya is not like the neighboring countries that even borrow for their recurrent expenditures. Because if our recurrent expenditure is projected to be 34 trillion, but our revenue collection is 25 trillion, that tells you that certainly we shall have to borrow to cater for some of our recurrent expenditures. And that is not good economically. It does not make economic sense. But also, you have been talking about skyrocketing commodity prices and the state of the economy. Of course, the president recently told us that our economy has reached the lower middle income status. I don't want to disagree with him, only that per capita income measurement is not a reflection of an improvement in the welfare of all the ordinary citizens, because you only get the GDP of the country and divide it by the population and you get the average. So in a country like ours, where we have multinational companies, we have foreign investors dominating the manufacturing sector, Indians and Chinese, and a few rich people who are connected to government. This economic growth actually is concentrated in the hands of those very few people, and it does not necessarily, when it happens, when we get some progress in economic growth, it does not reflect the reality of what is in the pockets of the ordinary citizens. So of course, as a country, we've made some economic progress. We have made a lot of progress, like for when it comes to the exports, the value of our exports has increased from only $253 million in 1992 to now $6.6 billion, which is about 23 trillion annually. But also when it comes to the manufacturing sector, the number of factories has exponentially increased from only 80 factories in 1986 to 4870 factories, actually close to 5,000 factories, which are spread in different parts of the country. Certainly, by such indicators and many other indicators, well, it is agreeable that our economy has made a lot of progress, and I do not disagree with the president when he says we have reached the middle income status. Because middle income status, you reach it by getting, if a country gets a minimum per capita income of $1,036, which is about to, it simply means that every Ugandan is able to earn 3.7 million annually, or when you put it on monthly basis, slightly above 300,000, which is about $100. Even a border rider in our country here, of course, gets that money, more than 300,000 per month. There is a big percentage of Ugandans who are earning that money, more than 300,000 per month. So, but going back to the structure of our budget, the National Planning Authority, which is in charge of crafting our national development plans, and which set targets, like in the NDP3, which is running from 2020 to 2025. There are priorities that they are set which government has to follow in formulating the national budget, some of which have not been followed, especially when it comes to the productive sectors of the economy, which have potential to turn around our economy and improve the economic welfare of Ugandans. These sectors continue to be greatly underfunded. Sectors like agriculture. Actually, the budget for agriculture in the next budget has been reduced from 1.6 trillion to 1.2 trillion. ICT, which has a lot of potential to create millions of jobs. It continues to be greatly underfunded with a budget that is less than 0.5% of the national budget. Industry, the manufacturing sector continues to be greatly underfunded. So this productive tourism continues to be greatly underfunded. Kenya, for example, spends $25 million on marketing their tourism. globally. Rwanda spends about $35 million to market their tourism globally. But for us in our national budget, only $2 million are allocated to UTB to market our tourism globally, which is just a drop. So government, and this is also the concern of the National Planning Authority, in their certificate of compliance they have issued on the budget for the next financial year. Their major concern is that these key sectors that have potential to turn around the economy have not been allocated enough money. Instead, we see sectors like security are increasingly getting a big portion of the national budget. In the budget for the next financial year, classified expenditure is a whopping 1.9 trillion. The other year it was 3.8 trillion classified expenditure. So every year a big portion of our national budget is for classified expenditure, and as you know, classified expenditure, you don't ask what it is going to do, and many people think this is actually a conduit for siphoning public resources. So generally, our budget is not realistic in many aspects, but I would like to commend the government for providing money for increasing salaries for scientists. That is highly commendable, but also for Ugandans looking out for opportunities. Government has put in that budget a total of 1.7 trillion as wealth creation funds, about to 1050, slightly above 1 trillion for the parish development model, 100 billions for Emyoga, microfinance support center money for SACCOs, about 80 billions. Actually, Parliament allocated an extra 35 billions in its reallocations for the microfinance support center to give out grants to SACCOs that are beginning. So that means that the money that will be given to those beginning SACCOs, it will not be for paying back. They are just donations, about 35 billions. There is also money that has been given to UDB, close to 100 billions, about 95 billions. And we all know that about a year or 2 years ago, UDB was given about 500 billions as part of government strategies for resuscitating the economy for different businesses to get a low-cost credit from UDB. Parliament has also maintained the money for distributing free coffee seedlings, about 35 billions given to UCDA for that purpose. You know, currently coffee is the leading foreign exchange earner for the country, and that is also commendable. So there is a lot of money that government has put in the budget for the next financial year for improving the economic welfare of Ugandans, especially those that are forming groups to do businesses together. Even the Women Enterprise Fund has been maintained in the budget after the intervention of Parliament, about 33 billions there for poor women who can come together and form groups and start income generating activities. Money has been put in the budget. So there is it comes to a total of 1.7 trillion of wealth creation funds that government has put in the budget. That is highly commendable. Also, the budget for the health sector has been increased by 250 billions, but the bulk of it is going to increase salaries for medical workers. Of course, our health sector continues to be greatly underfunded. I saw in the report of Parliament that the Parliament Health Committee that the National blood transfusion service their budget is only 17 billion. They had asked for more money for collecting enough blood, but it was not given to them, and so we do not have enough blood in the country. Also, the arrangement for National Ambulance Service, the money that was the ministry had requested before was not availed. Even money for rehabilitating a number of district and regional referral hospitals, the money was not availed. So Felix, back to you. That is the preamble I could give you. I am ready to answer any more questions as the discourse goes on.
Wow, it's quite very informative preamble. Indeed, you've taken time to look at this budget in detail and break it down. Now let's get to the specifics of this budget. For starters, the projected revenue collection is around 25 trillion. And recently, Bank of Uganda came out and projected a bit of an economic the growth in terms of the economic growth to slow down because of the challenges we are having concerning inflation. So this is the budget that has been that comes at a point in time when our economic performance is not very good, despite the little bit of growth that we are competing against inflation as a result of external global factors. So how realistic is this projected revenue collection in light of the current existing economic challenges to finance this budget that, as is already, is quite ambitious?
Mr. Kafum, actually, in the minority report that was issued by the opposition Shadow Minister for Finance, Mwanga Chivumbi, and Ibrahim Semujunganda, that was one of their concerns. Their argument was that the 25.7 trillion projected revenue collection is not realistic, and their argument was that in the last financial year, government registered a revenue shortfall of 2 trillion. And in the previous financial year of 2019-2020, the revenue shortfall was 3 trillion. In the current financial year, which is ending, last week, the Minister for Finance told us in an engagement we had with him that they have so far registered the revenue shortfall of close to 800 billion. Of course, that tells you that at least because we have just a few weeks to the end of the financial year, but that was as of April. That was as of April 2022. But of course, the financial year is ending. But his argument was that at least the shortfall has greatly reduced from 3 trillion to 2 trillion and now to 800 billion. Even if the financial year ends for the remaining few weeks, the shortfall will still be lower. His argument was that they are optimistic that the revenue collections will grow. I want to agree with him to some extent because right now the economy, of course it was in January, the government fully reopened the economy. And because the economy was fully reopened, so all the segments of the economy are now active, and that has led, even from the reports of Bank of Uganda, they have been indicating, the monthly reports, that there is a huge increase in the economic activities since the economy was fully reopened. And because of that, there is a high likelihood that the 25.7 trillion revenue collection can be achieved because the economy is now fully reopened. But also, in as much as there are skyrocketing commodity prices globally, Uganda has not been greatly affected like so many other countries, and that's why even our inflation is not as high as is the case for so many other countries, including countries in the region. And the major reason for that is because for us, we have a lot of food as a country. because food is a major contributory factor to the country's inflation. So for us, we continue to have plenty of food, and that is why in the region in East Africa we always have one of the lowest inflation rates, because for us we have a lot of food, and that is partly one of the reasons why also we have one of the lowest cost of living in the world. The cost of living is so low in Uganda. So I am very optimistic that that revenue collection target can be achieved. Government only needs to ensure that more resources are put in the productive sectors of the economy, because when more resources are put in the productive sectors of the economy, more incomes will be generated which government can tax, and that will raise revenue collections. But of course, government has not been strategic when it comes to revenue collection. Our tax to GDP ratio of 13% is one of the lowest in the world, even in Africa. Africa's average is 16.9%. So our government has not been strategic. Even the World Bank says Uganda has potential to have a tax to GDP ratio of 23%. We are only at 13%. One of the reasons actually I have had experts put across why our tax to GDP ratio is still very low is because of tax exemptions. Of course, some of these tax exemptions arise out of connivance between some government officials and some of these investors, big investors. A big number of them are exempted from paying taxes. I saw a report that indicates that the country loses about 80 trillion because of these tax exemptions. So in that area, government has not been strategic enough to be able to ensure that our tax to GDP ratio goes up. And that is why, by the way, you talked about our public debt reaching 73%, and our debt to GDP ratio is now over 50%, which many experts say when it goes beyond that, it means it is no longer sustainable. And when you talk about that, some of the officials from the Ministry of Finance will tell you there are other countries that have a debt to GDP ratio of 80%, even beyond. Yeah, and sometimes they even point out some of the developed countries. But what they forget is that many of those developed countries have a very high tax to GDP ratio, which means they have the capacity to pay back. But for us, we have a very low tax to GDP ratio. It means the government's capacity to generate enough revenue to pay back the debts is very low. And that means actually that is why government has to limit its appetite for borrowing, because our capability, our capacity to pay back is very, very, very limited. Thank you.
Okay, you're still watching ACFIM Talks, and I'm with Moses Mulondo, who is the president of UPPA. UPPA is Uganda Parliamentary Press Association, and we are trying to analyze this budget that was passed.
And Kafuma, yes. You forgot to indicate that apart from being a journalist, okay, I am an expert in these matters. I have a Master of Business Administration. So
wow,
I am talking about these matters as an expert.
Okay, expert. I will call you a budget expert. Indeed. My apologies for that. Yes, but let us go for a break. But when we come back from a break, I think we need to look at now the issues around this. Of course, you've partly touched it. Issues concerning the way we plan to finance this budget, but also the bigger question that anybody is trying to understand: why are we failing as a government, as a country, to cut our cloth according to the size we have. Why do we budget for 40 trillion when we can only collect just 25 trillion? And also looking at the figures of how much we lose in terms of corruption, how much we are able to raise in terms of tax revenue. Is there a problem with planning? I think we shall.
My people, a cup of coffee, please. There is tea, everything. Snacks are on the way.
Yeah, thanks, but the reason that's why we are here, our people need different services. We at least need an ambulance at every center.
My sub-county is the forest. We used to depend on the former MP's vehicle, but when he lost his elections, he took away his vehicle.
Of course.
So what does that mean?
Use your budget as a district to procure the ambulances.
If I could, I would. But unfortunately, government operates differently.
What I'm saying, Chairperson, this is very serious and urgent.
Yes, I know. And why are they called local leaders then?
Local government.
You people, who sent you here?
I know, of course. We are concerned citizens who are watching people dying every day.
We've lost our beloved ones just because of poor health services.
Something has to be done.
You are right. Something has to be done, and very fast.
Yes.
That's transport for you. Go back.
But
All your concerns are taken care of. I will handle.
But
Have a
Chairman,
safe journey.
Thank you so much.
but this man seems to undermine our cause as to why we're here.
No, don't misunderstand me. This is just transport, no strings attached.
Chairman, we came here to discuss and find solution to our problems. But it seems you don't want to engage with us. Let's go and mobilize people, and you will see how serious we are.
Good citizens, let us always hold our leaders accountable. Leadership is a service, not a privilege.
Contribute today at www.politicalfinanceafrica.org/donate.
Welcome back from a short break. You're still watching ACFIM Talks. We're discussing the National Budget 2022. And the bigger question is it responsive to the skyrocketing prices? And with me, I have Moses Mlondo. But also the president of the Uganda Parliamentary Press Association and a senior reporter. Before we went for a break, Moses given us a bit of an analysis of the budget, what these figures mean, what the 48.1 trillion mean, how it has been cut and shared across the different sectors. The reason why I think it's important for me to go to the next question is it's all about, okay, we seem to be entering into a phase of having an unsustainable debt. And almost everybody knows for a fact that I think our appetite for borrowing is unquenchable. If anybody out there pragmatically would say, okay, is it possible we can live within our means? If we are collecting 25 trillion, can we budget according to 25 trillion, be more frugal with our resources, reduce wastage? Part of wastage is into address corruption and all that. And again, here we are again, when you look at the budget, because the figures tell you that out of the 48.1 trillion, government is going to borrow, it will only be able to raise 25. It will borrow 7.1 domestic borrowing, and then probably around 2.1 external borrowing, grants. Again, we are borrowing. What is the problem? Why do we have a country that is continuously run on borrowing? And how sustainable can this be? And this is why I bring you in, Moses. Why don't we just live within our means? Is that so difficult for us to achieve?
Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, you proceed.
Okay. First of all, the biggest challenge we have as a country is the cost of public administration. And that is actually explains why our budget for recurrent expenditures is a whopping 34 trillion. Over the years, government has been creating so many administrative units, so many local governments, even government entities, so many government agencies have been created, many of them actually duplicating work that is already being done by another government entity, by a government ministry. And of course, even government is aware of this dilemma, and that is why they have a plan of merging government entities. But this has been there for the last 5 years. They have been dragging their feet. It looks like they have failed to do it. I can give you an example. The budget for local governments in the next financial year, their recurrent budget is 3.6 trillion for all local governments, for paying salaries, wages, administrative costs. It is 3.6 trillion. But the budget for development expenditures is only 900 billions. It's not even a trillion. 900 billions for development expenditures for all the local governments in the country. But their recurrent budget is 3.6 trillion. In fact, I saw a report sometime back which indicated that about 80% of the money that is sent to the local government goes into paying salaries and administrative costs. When you look at Parliament, our Parliament has been expanding over the years. A few years ago, the budget for Parliament was only 200 billions. Today, it is approaching 900 billions. Even State House. A few years ago, the budget for State House was about 150 billions. Today, the budget for State House is in the range of 700 billions. When you add on the money for Office of the President, it is approaching 1 trillion. And this is, I saw in the minority report for the opposition, it was Semju who presented that part. He was suggesting that we need to cut the budget we spend on the presidency, both State House and Office of the President, and reallocate that money and spend it on much more pressing needs the country has, like the health sector. For the basic facilities in many health centers are not there. Ultrasound machines, which would greatly help in reducing maternal health. Most of the health centers do not have ultrasound machines. So the cost of public administration for our country is so high. Maybe it will require a new government, like you saw what happened in Tanzania when Magufuli took over, and he undertook a number of radical reforms for reducing the cost of public administration in Kenya, including stopping travels abroad. His argument was that if you need any information in any other country, we have ambassadors in those countries. Use our missions abroad to get that information. And that is why Magufuli was able to turn around the economy of Tanzania in a very short period of time. So as a country, I don't know whether we shall need a new government, but even this government can do it. That's through soul searching and making reforms. I remember in the history of Buganda Kingdom, there was a king called Mukavya who did some soul searching. he was very cruel. He did some soul searching and reformed, and even he's changed his name from Mukavya to Mutesa. So our government, it is not yet too late for them to make some radical reforms, especially on the area of the cost of public administration. You have seen public uproar on the 193 billions Parliament added on their budget, which had not been allocated to them. And the reports indicate that this is money for enhancing their allowances. So the cost of public administration for our country, it is too high, because for a small country that has meager resources with a very small revenue, with a very small, very low tax to GDP ratio of 13%, we should not be having a very high cost of public administration. So that is an area where we shall need to undertake radical reforms. I saw even when Parliament reallocated 1.6 trillion, I looked at the breakdown and quantified it. Still, the bulk of their reallocations were going towards recurrent expenditures, not government expenditures. So you can really see that we have a big challenge with our political establishment, both the executive and the legislature. And many times, by the way, the two, can I use connive? Maybe let me use the word collaborate. The two all often collaborate in allocating money to themselves, and that's why I'm telling you, maybe it will require a new government to come in place and undertake radical reforms. Look at the size of our cabinet, 8 cabinet ministers. We don't need all those ministers. They have big convoys that spend a lot of money. So we need radical reforms in that area for our budget to be restructured to be more realistic.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Indeed, thank you so much. Indeed, I think we are victims of political patronage. This is patronage politics. When you have so many administrative structures and you're spending so much on recurrent budget, and I think that's where we are as a country. And this brings me to the next question that is looking at the all aspect of supplementary budgeting, because there have been arguments, and people, a number of them are now arguing that probably budgeting in Uganda is ceremonial. It's just to fulfill the constitutional requirements. It's just to tick the boxes, because when you look at our behavior in terms of the way we spend and utilize our budget has nothing to do with the whole budget. We make the budget. We didn't have budget discipline, and that explains why we are constantly, every after 3 months. So and now this begs the question whether do we do budget for the sake of budgeting, or do we do budget for its actual purpose? Does budgeting still have does it still have a place of relevance, looking at the way we manage our budgets, but also looking at the way we exercise budget discipline?
That's a very good question. It actually speaks to poor planning and the budgeting discipline. There is a very big variance actually between what is budgeted for and the actual execution. I can tell you, I saw a report indicating that UNRWA is struggling with a debt of close to 600 billions, which is also attracting a lot of interest. In their report, they were indicating that the more they delay to pay money, it is attracting interest of about 250 million, either every day or every month. It was a lot of money. And that what caused that is because their budgets were cut. You see, usually money is allocated in the national budget, but in the course of implementing, the Ministry of Finance, in most cases on directives from the executive, from cabinet, usually cuts the budget, especially when they are generating the supplementary budget you've been talking about. Because many times the money for supplementary budgets is got from cutting budgets for other entities, and many times the works and transport sector has been suffering because of that. And because of that, UNRWA now has a debt of close to 600 billions to contractors that they have failed to fully pay because their budgets were cut. And when these budgets are cut, unfortunately, still the bulk of the supplementary budgets go in recurrent expenditures like classified budget, the State House, defense. So that is an area. At some point, we were grilling Keith Mwakanis when he was the Secretary to the Treasury on the issue of supplementary budgets. And you know, sometimes he speaks the truth. He said, this is beyond my control. I am also concerned about it, but when you are there and you get a directive from State House, what do you do? So he was shifting the blame to the political leaders, that they are the ones that are responsible for that indiscipline. So supplementary budgets, which are a reflection of budgeting discipline and poor planning, majorly can be blamed on the political leaders, but they are creating a very big problem because in many cases, you can imagine now, money for works and transport, roads are very fundamental in building a firm foundation of economic development, but not only by the works and transport, so many other sectors usually suffer, their budgets are cut and money is reallocated. You see, in the budget for the next financial year, classified expenditure is 1.9 trillion, but by the time we shall end the financial year, that budget will have increased because there will be a supplementary somewhere in the course of the financial year for classified expenditure. So again, that is one weak area of our national budget, which needs to be fixed.
Thank you so much. I'm still watching ACFIM Talks. I'm with Moses Mulondo, who is a budget expert. So the president of Uganda Parliamentary Press Association. And you can be part of this conversation by joining us on our social media platforms. You can drop a question. We are live on ACFIM, Facebook ACFIM, and YouTube ACFIM Uganda, and also on our Twitter handle at ACFIM UG. You can ask your questions and we'll be able to respond to them. My other issue, which I think is important we discuss, Moses, is around and let me quickly roll it back to you gave a very good breakdown on the 1.7 trillion that has been allocated towards the wealth creation. And you see any other person who picks this budget, because it's giving you block figures, you would ask yourself, where do I fit into this budget? And if I'm an ordinary Ugandan and a taxpayer, I would ask myself, how does this budget make sense to me first personally? And when I was looking at the figures you're raising, how much is going to PDM, Emyoga, and the capitalization of UDP, of course, and how much is going to ECD, Uganda Coffee Development Authority. I'm still a bit struggling to connect an ordinary Ugandan who is battered by the current situation to all these opportunities. And some have argued that the challenge with these very many wealth creation programs is that they tend to be hijacked by politics. What's your take on this one?
Yes, of course, politics can always be there. Before I answer that question, I had left out the Small Business Recovery Fund, which is to the tune of 200 billions, which is part of those wealth creation funds. Government has has contributed 100 billions, and the commercial banks are also adding another 100 billions. So small-scale businesses that may not have collateral security and other requirements that UDB usually requires can benefit from that arrangement, and it has been put in place as part of the government measures for resuscitating the economy. I also forgot to tell you that Uganda Development Corporation, UDC, which is the investment arm of government, has been allocated about 46 billions, also as part of initiatives for improving the economic welfare of Ugandans. And of course, the UDC usually establishes factories in different parts of the country. When UDC was being restored in 2016, there was a commitment from Parliament and the Executive to capitalize it with 500 billion, which is yet to be fulfilled, because 46 billion is just like a drop. It can only be spent on 1 or 2 factories. It's not a lot of money. So, and yet, that is an area which would, you see, so many Chinese companies that are constructing roads here in Uganda and different parts of the world are state-owned farms, state-owned by the state of China. So as a country, one of the remedies that you even in answering what you've talked about, these initiatives of the Myoga handouts and what have you, of course, they are not, from the point of economics, they are not an effective way of turning around an economy. The necessary measures should be towards UDC, towards UDB, ensuring that government, like in NDP, the government had promised to restore the Uganda Commercial Bank, the cooperative bank, but they have not yet taken any measures to do that, because that would greatly help us to bring down the cost of borrowing money, because our interest rates are still very high. Many other countries we are competing with, even the investors that we compete with, they get credit at as low as 2%, 3% from their countries. But here, interest rates are still very high, and the measures that government needs to put in place, like restoring state-owned banks, have not yet been undertaken. Kenya, they still have their Kenya commercial banks, and it is actually dominating East Africa. It's in Uganda, it's in South Sudan, it's in DR, it's all over, and it is greatly helping them. So government and parliament need to seriously allocate enough money to UDC to establish factories in different parts of the country. Even this money government that was, and the incentives they were giving to Pinet and Lika to start a coffee factory here, that assistance support should have been given to UDC to start and to work with, through private public partnership, to work with other investors who are already there in the country to establish a coffee factory. So government needs to fulfill that commitment that made to allocate at least 500 billions to UDC as an investment arm of government, to create state-owned enterprises, to create factories in different parts of the country, which will create a number of jobs and even improve our revenues, our revenue collections, and greatly turn around our economy. But back to your question of these wealth creation funds, of course, they can greatly help to turn around the incomes, individual incomes of Ugandans who are in groups. Kenyans have so many circles. They have been successful in that area of cooperatives and circles. You find circles in Kenya that have billions of money, and it has greatly improved the economic welfare of the people of Kenya. So even here it is possible. A few years ago, like 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, Parliament passed a resolution to exempt SACCOs from paying taxes. So, and the motivation for doing that was that they had discovered this would be an effective way of empowering Ugandans economically. So, and I think that is why in the budget for the next financial year, Parliament has added 35 billions to Microfinance Support Center for giving out grants, donations to different SACCOs that will be created. But you also need to remember that the parish development model is going also to be anchored on that basis of people being in groups that are involved in production and they are funded. So people have to create SACCOs, people have to create cooperatives. That is the direction that we are taking. So which is a commendable intervention. Ugandans need to be sensitized on how to, need to be empowered on financial literacy and how to manage SACCOs and cooperatives. I have seen even in the reallocations Parliament, it again they put in place about 25 billions for giving to cooperatives in different parts of the country to empower them. So that is a step in the right direction because many countries have registered, like I have said, Kenya, many countries have registered a lot of progress in having organized groups of citizens involved in economic activities in the form of SACCOs and the cooperatives.
All right. Indeed. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Indeed. That's the way to go. Even I think I was looking at China, how China developed. It invested so much in local entrepreneurship and industries, and I think that's where Uganda needs to start focusing. My other question, as our time is fast spent, is around looking at the way this budget has been organized and how allocations have been made. It's around the budget priorities. You partly touched it in when you were trying to lay a case, make a foundation on your quick thoughts on how the budget, on what you thought was how the budget looked like. But now I was quickly looking at some of the least funded. You partly touched them. And for example, I looked at tourism vis-a-vis its contribution to the GDP, which is, I think tourism brings in about 5.6 trillion towards the coffers. But when you look at how much is allocated, it's much, much less. And my question here is around, if you were to prioritize, let's assume you had been given opportunity as a budget expert to allocate, to cut this budget and prioritize, why do you think we should have put most of our resources in terms of budget allocations? Your quick thoughts.
That's a very good question. From the economics knowledge and business knowledge that I have, of course, as a country, our major comparative advantage in the global arena is in agriculture. 43% of East Africa's arable land is in Uganda. Arable land is where you can successfully grow crops and you get the yields that you want. So Uganda has potential to actually become a global food basket. But our government is not yet adequately investing in the agriculture sector. Even the very commitment that was made in 2003 in the Maputo Protocol of African governments allocating a minimum of 10% of their national budgets to agriculture, we have not yet even reached a half. Our allocation is still below 5%. So that is an area I would cut money from security and reduce the cost of public administration and put more money in stimulating agricultural production. Because even when you look at the volume of our exports, which I have told you have exponentially grown from $253 million in 1992 to to now $6.6 billion, which is about 23 trillion. The bulk of our exports actually are agricultural exports. So it tells you that as a country, we would get a lot of money, even a lot of foreign exchange, if we invested so much in stimulating agricultural production, put in place tractors at all levels, at all parishes, so that our people don't have to use rudimentary tools of farming, and all the other necessary facilities, invest in irrigation. But our government has not yet taken that seriously. The other sector where we have comparative advantage is tourism, because our country is exceptionally naturally endowed. Actually, in my Master of Business Administration, my research was on Uganda's tourism sector, and I discovered a lot. There have been so many international agencies that have ranked Uganda as one of the top 5 tourism destinations in the world, and their ranking was based on the level of tourism attractions that are outstanding that we have as a country. Among the top 5, some of these agencies include the Lonely Planet, Rough Guides, and even CNN. On many occasions, they have ranked us as one of the top 5 tourism destinations in the world. But when it comes to the actual number of tourists coming in, we are not even among the top 30 countries in the world with the highest number of tourists. And there are so many reasons, one of which I gave, that when you look at the budget for marketing our tourism, only $2 million. Our neighbors like Kenya, Rwanda, $25 and $35 million. France, which is not even among the top 5 tourism destinations ranked in the rankings of those agencies I have talked about, they annually get about 84 million tourists. But for us, we are still in the range of slightly above 1 million tourists. So Uganda has enormous potential in that area of tourism to get a lot of money. Of course, the other challenge we have as a country, apart from a smaller budget allocated to that sector, is the image we have internationally, that our governance still has the challenges whenever they see bullets being fired, people being tear gassed, people being killed on our streets, those chaotic scenes. They scare away so many tourists from coming to our country. So that is another area where we have to improve as a country. If we can improve our governance, if we can improve our democracy, and improve our image internationally, it will attract more tourists to come to our country. It's an area, even from the research I did, it's an area where we need to improve as a country, that we have to make measures to make improvements in our democracy and our governance, so that the image of our country, and that also actually has a direct bearing link to our FDI, which has been declining over the years, foreign direct investments. We've not been attracting premium investors, especially from Europe and USA, to come here and put in place investments, partly because of the image of our country in the global arena. There is a thinking outside there that this is a country that is politically chaotic, that is under dictatorship, where there is no freedom, where political opponents are oppressed, many in jail. Even as journalists, on many occasions, our press freedom is greatly violated. In fact, the recent Press Freedom Index report indicates that our ranking has worsened. We have moved from position 115 to 125. So those indicators, people who want to invest in different countries look at such indicators, and when they realize that the political risk is very high, like in our country, those premium big investors in those countries like Europe and America cannot come to invest here. So that is an area that we have to address as a country to make sure that we improve our democracy and governance. So those two sectors, the other sectors that we have greatly neglected as a country is ICT. ICT is the fastest growing sector in the world with potential to create millions of jobs. In America, one ICT company like Apple is worth $1,000 billion. $1,000 billion, which is $1 trillion. That is actually higher than the entire economy of East Africa. Our economy is only $45 billion. So you can see the enormous potential in the ICT sector. But our country is greatly, our government is greatly stifling it actually, even through some of the policies, like the taxes they introduced. Recently, they introduced the 12% excise duty on internet data, which has actually made our internet to be the most expensive in the world. In fact, in the whole of Africa, it is only Uganda and Zambia that have introduced taxes that limit access to internet. And because of that, when OTT was introduced, our access to internet dropped from 48% to 33%. Kenya has left us in that area and greatly commended in the global arena. Kenya's access to internet is now the highest in Africa at 83%. But our access to internet has dropped to even 33% because of these taxes that limit access to internet. By the way, globally, taxes that limit access to internet are greatly discouraged. Any country that wants to get to register progress in the ICT revolution cannot put taxes on internet. But here, I know from my investigations, even experts in the Ministry of ICT and the Ministry of Finance discouraged the government from introducing OTT. But the executive cabinet did not listen. So that is an area where, as a country, we are not putting enough. We need to invest enough in the ICT sector because it has potential to create millions of opportunities for our young Ugandans. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That was really, really quite very, very, very resourceful. And this brings us to the close of today's edition of ACFIM Talks. And I was having Moses Mulondo making sense of this budget. Moses Mulondo is the president for Uganda Parliamentary Press Association, a senior reporter, and also a budget expert. And we've been discussing the national budget 2022-2023 and answering the bigger question whether this budget is realistic, responsive, especially in the current context of the skyrocketing prices. And I myself, Felix Kafuma, was the moderator. Until next week, bye-bye, take care, stay blessed.